Hi, welcome to another episode of It's Just Racing, hosted by Jim and Jim. I'm Jim,
And I'm Jim.
and we're here to talk about racing. Going to start off last weekend in Supercross. Round 3 was in Anaheim, California, and the 250 heats. Winners were Cody Schock and Hayden Deegan. The 450 heats were claimed by Eli Tomac and Jason Anderson. In the last chance qualifier for the 250, Gavin Towers was victorious. And of note, 32-year-old Colin Jurin finished fourth to transfer to his first main event since 2014. Yes, 11 years between main event appearances for Colin. 450 last chance qualifier was won by Justin Cooper. Moving on to the main events, the 250 main was won by Hayden Deegan, followed by Julian Beaumer and Cole Davies rounding out the podium. This is the first all-teenager podium since 2011, and did that make me feel old? Now, Danger Boy Deegan led from the gate drop to the checkers, finally earning the results that most of us expected from him coming into this season. He's definitely been expected to win the championship, but he got off to a slow start. Got it turned around this weekend. Beaumer holds on to the points lead after 3 rounds, though, followed by Deegan and Jordan Smith, with Joe Shimoda, who's been riding the last 2 rounds with 2 broken fingers, and Cole Davies rounding out the top 5 in the point standings.
I've been really impressed by Joe Shimoda with riding through those broken fingers. That's got to be tough.
And he won the first race of the season and then broke his 2 fingers on his left hand in practice before the second race. So the one race he was healthy and he won. He's doing pretty well this year, that's for sure. In the 450 main, Justin Cooper, who, if you'll recall, transferred through the last chance qualifier, rocketed out and grabbed the whole shot, and led about the first half of the race before relinquishing the top spot to Jason Anderson. Jet Lawrence soon passed Anderson for the lead and the main event win. Podium was Lawrence, Ken Roczen, and Jason Anderson. Roczen takes the points lead with his 3rd strong performance. He had 2 seconds and a 4th this year, followed closely by Chase Sexton, Jet Lawrence, Eli Tomac, and Cooper Webb. With Roczen taking the points lead, next week will be the first time in 10 years that a Suzuki has carried the red number plate.
It is nice to see the Suzuki back up there. If I remember correctly, I think it was Kickstart Kenny the last time they had that red plate.
I think you're right, and then he probably hurt himself.
Yeah.
He tends to do that when he has the points lead.
But hey, it looks like he's being more consistent now. He doesn't have the speed that he used to, but maybe he's turning into more of that veteran who just always puts himself in position.
He's getting old. He's got to slow down. Slow and steady wins the race, that's what they say. After 3 weeks in California, Supercross is going to be running round 4 this weekend in Glendale, Arizona. Jim, you have anything to say about the 24 hours of Daytona?
In fact, I do. This year I tried to stay up for all 24 hours. I couldn't do it. I fell asleep somewhere around 5 in the morning. Maybe next year. But our winners in each class, in the top class, the GTPs, you had the number 7 Porsche Penske. And Porsche, they looked pretty good all day, all night. Both cars were up near the top for most of the race. The number 7, driven by Felipe Nasr, Nick Tandy, and Lawrence Vanthor, ended up winning. And interesting note, Nick Tandy has now won all 4 major 24-hour races. He is the first to do so, those races being Daytona, Le Mans, the Nürburgring, and Spa.
Wow, he gets around.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Now, didn't Penske win last year, too?
They did. They showed a graphic on the TV. They were showing the captain, Roger, right there at the end of the race, 87 years old, still going strong. He's built quite a dynasty for himself.
Yeah, he owns pretty much everything, too.
I think they said he's won the last 2 Indy 500s, the last IMSA and World Endurance Championship. and the last 3 NASCAR championships.
Wow. Yeah, he's doing something right.
That's global domination.
Yep.
Moving on to the LMP2 class. The number 8 Tower Motorsports car won that class. It was brought home by Sebastian Bourdais with a healthy 40-second lead. That was one of the picks that I was pretty confident in before this race. Old Seabass has still got it, and I'm glad that he was able to show that. Now, moving on to the GT classes, there was a lot of action and a lot of different competitive cars, but in the end, in the GT Pro class, it was the Ford Mustang that came out victorious. And this is the first win for Ford since they brought back their racing program a couple years ago. So that's good to see.
Yeah, good to see the dark horse on top.
In the GT Amateur class, it was actually a customer car for Corvette Racing, the number 13, that got that win. And that was a close battle all the way to the end. And so that was fun to watch. Moving on to some major action, there were a lot of cautions in this race. We were nowhere near the lap record. We were about 65 laps short of that. There were, I think, 14 or 15 cautions.
That was a lot of slow laps. I know. I probably saw 5 or 6 hours, and I'd say a good hour was at speeds I could drive.
I had high hopes for the Lamborghini GTP car, but unfortunately, they only made it about 45 minutes. They had to retire the car with what looked like maybe engine issues at their first pit stop.
Oh, that sounds more like an English car than an Italian car.
Yeah, well, hopefully they figure out whatever happened and fix it so we can get some more racing out of them. Also, there was a big crash in turn 1 during the night hours, right at the beginning. It was on a restart, and the number 40, one of the Wayne Taylor GTPs, got a little loose on acceleration. It looked like maybe just too much power on cold tires. I'm not really sure. But he went into a tire wall and bounced across the track. And that it's a blind turn. And with so many cars, they just piled into him. I think it took out 7 cars, and including a couple class leaders for GT Pro.
That was an expensive blind turn.
Yeah, it's got to be the longest 5 seconds of your life, just rolling across the track and hoping no one hits you.
Gotta wonder why you didn't hold the brake, but maybe with the grass there, it wouldn't have mattered. Or maybe he did and just slid.
Well, now the GTP cars don't have ABS, and on those cold tires at night, it was down into the 40s, so there probably wasn't much control sliding across the grass.
Got it.
Also, in other news, the new curbs in the bus stop chicane, which they now call the Le Mans chicane. I'll continue to call it the bus stop, though, because that's what I'm familiar with. They seem to be causing some problems for some of the prototypes, only the ones who were using them real aggressively. I noticed a couple times during the broadcast they were asking drivers about the curbs, and they mentioned that there were definitely 2 lines you could run, and they could see some of those prototypes running that very aggressive line and then later having problems. 2 notable problems. One of the Meyershank cars appeared to break a drive shaft after hitting the curb a little too aggressively. So they went quite a few laps down fixing that. And then later on, one of the top contenders, the number 31 Whelen Engineering Cadillac, had a pretty scary crash on the high banks coming out of turn 4, which we had a really good angle to see from a GT car that they were lapping. But it looked like something in the rear suspension just snapped. It just sent them straight into the wall. And so I don't think that was really a curbing problem as much of you need to stay off the curbs a little more. But hopefully those drivers are more familiar with that curbing now, and they can avoid issues like that in the future.
Yeah, something broke in the left rear of that, it looked like, and dropped down, and once you're dragging steel and carbon fiber on the track doing 180, you don't have any control, and you just went into the wall. Good to see everybody walk away.
And last, in the GT classes, we did have a bit of argy-bargy in the morning hours between the BMW and Corvette teams. Now, I didn't see most of this battle because I had fallen asleep. But from the highlights, it looked like both teams were being way too aggressive, and I'm not sure I like that kind of racing from either of them.
It it was not gentlemanly, we'll put it that way. I saw some of it live, and then watching the replays. At first, I agreed with the Corvette drivers that the BMWs were driving like BMW owners. But then, watching the replays, seeing different angles, there was just no give and take. There was no gentlemanly road course racing that I'm used to in my lifetime. It looked more NASCAR-ish with door banging and wheel to wheel and pushing guys off into the grass, and you've got the iconic finger out the window from the Corvette that everybody's probably seen that picture now. But all in all, I think it was both of them just needed to I don't know, calm down a little bit and realize there was still a good hour plus to go.
I think maybe the race director should have had a little more control of the situation, especially when you had that contact with the Corvette pushing the second BMW off track in the International Horseshoe. Because the lapped BMW had already received a blocking penalty and basically just parked it right in the middle of the turn. And that was kind of ridiculous. I don't think something should have happened to prevent that. And then later on, one of the other Corvettes just straight up dumped the BMW into turn one. And I don't like to see that kind of retaliation. So
hopefully it doesn't carry on to the next race. These guys got to concentrate on racing and not revenge.
Luckily, driving standards from the rest of the team seem to be pretty high. So hopefully it's just those two.
Didn't see too many other problems myself either.
Now, the tire warm-up was a really big factor, especially in the GTP class, because it did get pretty cold at night. It was down into the 40s.
And you called that in last week's episode that was going to be one of your keys to the races, and it definitely was.
I had a feeling about it, but I didn't know just how powerful it would be. One point where I was particularly impressed, Jack Aitken driving the 31, the Whelen Engineering Cadillac. He had a very good stint. He drove from fourth all the way up into second. He gained 13 seconds on the leader, and they pulled into the pits right next to each other at the same time. And then notably, the Cadillac double stinted the tires, while the leading Porsche opted for the new tires. And I watched the gaps on the outlap, and the Cadillac pulled out a 20-second lead just in that first lap alone. And that was just from having warm tires. So that was kind of crazy to see.
So used warm tires trumped new cold tires.
That they did. Now, I particularly enjoyed this race. I thought there weren't really any boring parts. It was very competitive. Besides that Lamborghini, who had early issues, all four of the manufacturers were competitive at some point in the top class. I thought the BMW had a chance there at the end with Dries Vanthoor. I think he was a little too aggressive. I think he needs to pick his moments a little more, save the car for the last couple laps. But if he can figure that out, I think he'll really be a contender in the coming years.
Now his brother's got to win, so he's got to get one too.
Yeah, he'll be hearing about that at the dinner table. But there were a few drivers who I just wanted to highlight. I picked the four best drivers who had the best performances, in my opinion. And those were Kamui Kobayashi, who in the early hours of the race really took his team to the lead, and he really pushed the pace. And I think he made all the other teams kind of take a step up to match him. And so I appreciated seeing that.
He used to be a Formula One racer, or no?
He did, back like 10 or 15 years ago.
I remember hearing the name, and when I hear Kobayashi, I think of competitive hot dog eating. So to see him in a race car, it always catches me by surprise, and you remind me that he actually is a racer, not a hot dog eater.
Well, both of them are pretty fast.
That's true.
Next up, I wanted to highlight Jack Aitken driving that 31 for that stint I mentioned earlier where he gained those 13 seconds on the leading car. Now, he didn't get a chance to fight for the win because he was in that car that had suspension issues and crashed. But before that, he was looking like he could bring that car to a victory.
Now he had a little bit of Formula One experience. He never raced though, did he?
I believe he was a development driver for Haas for a couple years.
Okay. The name was familiar to me, so.
Next up, Kevin Estra of the number 6 Porsche. This was not the winning Porsche. That car actually had the lead, but was passed by its teammate with about 15 minutes left. It was also passed by one of the Acuras. But Kevin Estra put in some very good stints. And I was a little confused as why he wasn't in the car at the end of the race. Now, it might have been something to do with drive time, or that late caution may have affected who their final driver was. But personally, I would have put Kevin Estra in there at the end.
Now they've got those rules where you can only drive a certain number of hours, right?
They do. It's something like you can only drive 4 hours in a 6 hour time span, something like that.
Maybe he was up against the clock and they had to pull him out and lose the race.
Yeah, it's tough, especially with late cautions, because it might mess up when you're trying to get a driver out. It might add a couple seconds to your pit stop, and you can't afford that.
But at least one of the team cars won, so he can take solace in that.
He can. He's got plenty more opportunities. He's a very good driver. And the final driver I wanted to highlight is actually a GT driver who didn't get to drive very much, but Andrea Caldarelli, and he started in 4th or 5th place. And he had gotten that car to the lead within the first 3 laps. And it was very impressive. We didn't even see him get to the lead. It was so quick. The TV broadcast was focused on the battle in the GTPs. But he led that race as long as he was in the car. And unfortunately, his team had that pit stop issue where they couldn't get the left front tire off, and that lost them all of that track position. And then later up, they were caught in that big crash.
I remember seeing them beating on that car with a hammer, trying to get the tire off, just like real life.
Yeah, never good to see from the leading car. And that's all I've got for my analysis.
All right, thanks, Jim. So next week is not a lot going on. We've got Supercross in Glendale. And then NASCAR has their little preseason show race. Used to be known as the Busch Clash. Now it's something else Clash. I don't even know. The event is moving from the LA Coliseum to the Madhouse this year. It'll be at Bowman Gray Stadium. Hopefully having it on a larger facility instead of a makeshift track inside of an old football stadium will provide some type of enjoyable racing action. 39 drivers are entered to try to make the 23-car main event. Personally, I've got issues with this whole thing. The one thing I do like is they're using a heat race format. As a former Saturday night racer, I love heat races. I don't think that spreading this event out over 2 days is the best idea. Saturday is going to be practice. They're going to time the cars during practice, and the practice will also act as qualifying. They are not going to have single car qualifying. Then they will have 4 25-lap heat races, which the top 4 of each heat race transfer to the main event on Sunday. And then that's it for Saturday. And then Sunday they come back for a 75-lap last chance qualifier. Top 2 from the last chance qualifier transfer in. They'd take the 21st and 22nd spot. And the 23rd spot will be filled by the best driver from last year that did not qualify.
Now, how do they pick the best driver from last year?
Points. Strictly points.
Now, is that real points or playoff points? Or...
That's the NASCAR point system as it is officially recorded in North Carolina. We can talk about that another day if you'd like. The race is actually a 200-lap main event following the 75-lap last chance qualifier. This is just too much for me. It's too much racing. That doesn't sound right, but you know what I mean. And it's just too spread out. I'd run the whole thing on a Sunday. It should be a one-day event. If I were Captain NASCAR, there'd be 4 15-lap heats, a 30 lap last chance qualifier and a 100 lap feature. You're getting 100 lap, 200 laps of action total with that format. This is a made for TV event. It should be 3 hours tops, not spread out 3 hours over 2 days. I understand they need the advertising revenue, but I don't see this as the best way to do it. I don't like dragging it out so long. But what do I know? There's people a lot smarter than me with a lot more money than me. They're the ones who are calling the shots, and it's their game, so you have to play it.
No, I'm not really a big fan of exhibition races. I don't really see the point of running a race that doesn't count for anything.
Me either.
But I'm a little confused. So it's 2 days, but they're not having a separate practice and qualifying?
Nope. They're going to have practice with, I believe it's 10 or 15 cars on track at a time. And they're just going to pick your fastest lap out of your practice session, and that will be your qualifying time.
See, that just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, if you're taking the time to make it 2 days, I feel like you should have qualifying.
Well, if you're having 200 lap main, 100 laps worth of heat races, 75 laps of LCQ, throw some caution laps in there, we're already over 400 laps.
I suppose that is excessive.
Right, so cut everything in half and it'd be a nice one-day show. But that's all I've got. If there's anything you want us to talk about next week's show, just drop a comment down below and let us know. Obviously, we'll be recapping the Supercross race out of Glendale. I'll touch on anything NASCAR related, but there's been some NASCAR updates rule-wise, some Formula One updates rule-wise. Watch your mouth.
Oh, we've got a lot to say about that.
So if there's anything you want us to talk about, just drop it in a comment below. Otherwise, it'll be a quick recap of some Supercross, and we will discuss the ridiculous rules and rule changes and rule enforcement that are coming up in the upcoming season. So thanks for tuning in to It's Just Racing, and we'll talk to you next week.